Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to look at the top 10 most landlord-friendly states in my opinion. This list will be in no particular order. And then at the end I'll have a bonus state, the least landlord-friendly state. So stick around for that. Now a couple disclaimers before we dive into this. This is not intended to be a list to take advantage of tenants. This is just a way for you to know which states you might have a little more control in the process of perhaps an eviction or in ways that you interact with tenants that are fair both to you and the tenant. When it comes to real estate, it's just really important to have as much control as possible. And so some of the states on this list just give more control to the landlord. Now, the most disconcerting thing for landlords is lack of cash flow. So these things are really important to think about when you're putting tenants in a property. When it comes to rental properties, cash flow is super important for many different reasons, but specifically because as a landlord, you're still gonna have to pay the mortgage and the taxes and things like that. And if a tenant is not paying those or is not abiding by the lease, it makes things really difficult for you. So some states are more friendly to landlords, some are more friendly to tenants, and it's important to know what the rules are so that you know potentially how long it might be before you have cash flow coming back in. In some cases, it could be relatively quickly in some of these landlord-friendly states, but in other states, it could take a long time and you could take a big hit. Now, just because it may be a landlord-friendly state does not necessarily mean that it's a good place to invest. You'll obviously want to do your due diligence, do your research, figure out markets that make sense for you, and then maybe you whittle it down into a couple of those states that make sense. You're always going to want to look at demographics and the local municipality rules, stuff like that. Also, when talking about different municipalities, these are all state statutes, and most cities and towns and municipalities will abide by the state statutes, but occasionally some of these cities will have ordinances that are layered on top that give just an extra layer of protection to tenants. There's cities like Chicago where there are ordinances on top of the state statutes that landlords have to abide by, and it makes it a huge pain to manage property there. All right, as we go through this top 10 list, I'll mention one fact about each state that kind of makes it kind of fall into that top 10 designation. All right, in no particular order. Number 1, Arkansas. It's interesting. In Arkansas, you don't have to give notice to tenants that you'll be stopping by the property. In other states, you have to give maybe 24 or 48 hours, something like that. They have to have notice. In this case, you don't have to give any. All right, number 2, West Virginia. West Virginia is really interesting because it seems like they almost have no statutes in regards to tenants' rights. So I definitely would not want to be a renter there. All right, number 3, North Carolina. Now it's interesting, in North Carolina, if you have a month-to-month tenant, you only have to give them 7 days notice to vacate. Usually it's 30 to 60 days, sometimes even more. So that's a really interesting thing. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you could get rid of a tenant quickly that way. Number 4 is Georgia. So tenants have the right in most states, and they have a certain amount of time, call it 30 to 60 days most of the time, to get personal property out of the property. But in Georgia's case, there is no time. So if there is a lease violation, which specifically means one of the big violations in a lease, like maybe there's a meth lab there or a prostitution ring is running out of the house, something like that, that would be in violation of most leases. Hopefully that's in ours. And so the tenant, once they're served notice, they got to get out and take their stuff with them right away. Otherwise, it'll just go on the curb. Number 5 is Wyoming. Now in Wyoming, it's nice and quick. If there's non-payment of rent, you have a 3-day notice. Most states, it could be 5 days or even longer. Although tenants can withhold rent payment in Wyoming for services not provided, essential services. So something like if the landlord's paying for water but forgot to pay the water bill and the water shut off, that could be an essential service. If it's wintertime, the furnace goes out and it's not fixed right away, that could be considered an essential furnace. So a tenant, an essential service. So the tenant can withhold rent for those reasons. Number 6 is Louisiana. The interesting thing in Louisiana is that actually the tenant is able to deduct repairs from their rent. Now, the one thing that would make me nervous about this is, what's considered a repair. So hopefully that's spelled out in your lease, and you don't want them, replacing perfectly fine countertops with granite countertops, and then they just take that off your rent. That would not be cool. All right, number 7 is Idaho. Interesting thing here is that there is no cap on the maximum security deposit allowed. So in most states, it's going to be 1 to 2 months rent, and in Idaho, there is 0 cap on that. Number 8 is Mississippi. In Mississippi, for month-to-month contracts, there is no statute on the books for rent increases. So you really could raise the rent every month if you wanted to. Number 9 is Colorado. In Colorado, landlords have 3 days to serve termination for non-payment and lease violations. That is definitely favorable for landlords. And number 10, Ohio. Ohio gives landlords 30 days to return security deposits if there are no repairs taken out of it. All right, now for our bonus here. The most unfriendly landlord state is, drum roll please. Drum roll, please. It is Vermont. Now, most states will give you about 5 days to file a non-payment notice. In Vermont, it's 14. In addition to that, the tenant has 60 days to recover personal property. So in a best case scenario, you might be 90 days without cash flow in Vermont. Definitely not a good place to be a landlord, but a decent place to be a renter. Now, I think the most important takeaway from this list, in my opinion, is that really you can invest anywhere. There's going to be risk everywhere you go. You just got to find ways to mitigate that risk. And the biggest risk you face is putting the wrong tenant in your property. So make sure that you vet tenants like you would vet them if they were going to care for your children. It's so important to get good tenants. You can take a look at this video up here on how to find good tenants. Hey, thanks for sticking around and watching this video. We'll see you in the next one. Later.